desert wind carried more than dust across California in the late 1960s. It carried whispers, rumors of a man who promised freedom, who claimed to see the future, who drew in lost souls with nothing more than a stare and a tune strummed on a weathered guitar. His name was Charles Manson, and before the world knew his legacy of darkness, he was just another drifter, another forgotten face in America's endless tide of misfits. This is not just the story of one man. It is the story of how a generation's hunger for meaning was twisted into something unrecognizable. It is the story of how music, love, and rebellion turned into fear, control, and blood-stained nightmares. It is the story of the family. Charles Manson was born in 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. From the very beginning, life was chaos. His mother, still a teenager herself, spent more time chasing liquor than caring for her son. His father disappeared before he could even form memories. By the time he could walk, Manson was already learning one lesson that would shape his existence. The world could not be trusted. Abandoned, rejected, passed around from relative to relative, Manson grew up without the anchor of love. He discovered manipulation early, crying until he got what he wanted, lying when the truth gave him no power. School was no salvation. Teachers described him as cunning, restless, and impossible to control. By adolescence, petty theft had become his way of life. Prison would become the backdrop of his youth. From reform schools to federal lockups, Manson spent more time behind bars than outside them. But in confinement, he found something he lacked on the streets: an education and survival. Inside those cold walls, he studied people. He watched how inmates feared the strong and followed the confident. He learned that words could be weapons sharper than knives. And he discovered music, not just as sound, but as persuasion. With a guitar in his hands, Manson could charm even the hardest criminals into silence. By the mid-1960s, America was shifting. The Vietnam War raged overseas. At home, young people rejected the straight-laced culture of their parents. They sought peace, freedom, and love. San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury became a magnet for dreamers, poets, and rebels. When Manson left prison in 1967, he entered a world tailor-made for a man like him. He walked into the summer of love with nothing but charm, a guitar, and an endless hunger for control. To many, he seemed harmless. A small man with hypnotic eyes, always smiling, always talking about love and freedom. But underneath, he carried decades of bitterness, rejection, and rage. Manson drifted through San Francisco, playing music, preaching strange sermons about freedom from society, and gathering followers. They were young, mostly women, barely out of their teens. Some were runaways, others disillusioned daughters from middle-class homes. They saw in him what they craved. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. A father figure, a prophet, a man who claimed to hold the keys to a new way of living. One by one, they gave themselves to him. Not just their time or their loyalty, but their entire identities. Manson taught them to abandon their families, to leave behind names, money, and possessions. He convinced them that society was corrupt, that only he could lead them to truth. By 1968, Manson had gathered his so-called family. Together, they traveled in broken-down buses, painted with psychedelic colors, drifting through California like nomads. Eventually, they settled at Spahn Ranch, an old movie set on the edge of Los Angeles. It was here, among the decaying wooden facades of forgotten Western films, that the family began to grow. The ranch became their stage, their hideout, their kingdom. Life at Spahn Ranch was a strange mix of freedom and control. On the surface, it looked like paradise. Young people dancing in the sun, playing music, living without rules. But beneath the laughter, Manson's grip tightened. He controlled everything. Who spoke? Who ate? Who shared his bed? He used drugs to blur reality and twisted music to preach his own gospel. Manson filled the nights with talk of the coming apocalypse. He spoke of a war between races, a bloody revolution that only he foresaw. He called it Helter Skelter, borrowing the name from a Beatles song, twisting it into prophecy. To his followers, his words were sacred. They believed he was chosen, a messiah in the desert. But the truth was darker. Manson didn't just want peace and love. He wanted control. And he would use fear, manipulation, and violence to get it. At Spahn Ranch, the family practiced bizarre rituals. Manson told them to forget their pasts, to destroy their sense of self, to become nothing but extensions of him. He convinced them that the outside world was doomed. Only within his family was there salvation. Slowly, individuality disappeared. Women stopped using their birth names, adopting new ones Manson gave them. Men surrendered authority, obeying without question. The family became a hive mind, and Manson was the only voice that mattered. Outside the ranch, Los Angeles pulsed with glamour. Hollywood stars drove fancy cars, the music scene exploded, and money flowed endlessly. But just beyond the city lights at that dusty ranch, something sinister was growing. Manson was obsessed with music. He dreamed of being a rock star, believing his songs would spread his message across the world. Through connections with family members, he wormed his way into Hollywood circles. For a time, he brushed shoulders with producers and musicians, even stepping into the home of Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson. Wilson allowed Manson and his followers to stay in his mansion for a while. The family filled the house with chaos, endless parties, drugs, and strange rituals. Wilson was fascinated, even recording one of Manson's songs. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. But eventually the chaos became too much, and Manson was pushed out. To him, this rejection was unforgivable. It was not just a lost opportunity, it was a personal betrayal. That anger festered. It fed into his growing obsession that the world was blind, that only he saw the truth. And soon, his fantasies of music and fame would be replaced by something darker, something that would shake Los Angeles to its core. The sun set behind the mountains, and the desert grew cold. At Spahn Ranch, fires burned as the family gathered around Manson. His voice carried through the night. He spoke of destiny, of chaos, of blood to come. The young faces stared at him with wide, glassy eyes, hanging on every word. And in that moment, the line between dreams and nightmares vanished. The family was ready to follow him anywhere, even into the shadows. The days at Spahn Ranch bled into each other. Sunrise brought the same dusty wind. Sunset brought the same flickering firelight and chanting voices. Inside the makeshift compound, the family became more than a group of lost youth. They became a living organism, each member moving in rhythm with the desires of one man. Every glance, every gesture, every thought was filtered through Manson's gaze. He was their sun, their gravity, their center, and like a planet trapped in orbit, the family could not escape. Music remained their lifeline, but it was no longer just art, it was doctrine. Songs became lessons. Melodies carried warnings, promises, and threats. Manson composed lyrics that painted visions of apocalypse and survival, of chaos and rebirth. He sang of cities burning and of a world upside down, yet each note was layered with hypnotic allure. The followers absorbed every word. They practiced the songs endlessly, sometimes until exhaustion, repeating phrases like mantras. Within the melodies, Manson implanted control, turning rhythm and harmony into chains invisible to the eye. Drugs deepened the control. Psychedelics, LSD, and other substances blurred reality for the family. Hallucinations became instruction. Nightmares became guidance. A flash of color, a shadow across a wall, a whisper in the wind. All were interpreted as signs. Manson's voice became the thread weaving them together. He preached about a coming race war, a revolution that would shake the country. He named it Helter Skelter, borrowing from a song he claimed foresaw the collapse of society. In his telling, only the family would survive, only they would rise from the ashes. The outside world, he said, was blind, deaf, and corrupt. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Outside, Los Angeles moved in stark contrast. The city pulsed with life. Lights glittered and laughter echoed through the hills. Hollywood glamour coexisted with desperation, wealth beside poverty, dreams beside despair. Yet the family remained isolated in the desert. Spahn Ranch became their universe, its boundaries defined not by fences, but by the spell Manson cast. Manson's hold was subtle yet absolute. He blurred love and fear until they were indistinguishable. A compliment might be followed by a warning. A gesture of kindness could conceal an expectation. The family learned that happiness was conditional. They craved approval as a lifeline, and they trembled at disappointment. Even within intimacy, control was absolute. Manson dictated pairings, instructed bed assignments, and watched their interactions. Each connection became a tool to manipulate, each bond a lever to maintain influence. The ranch was a stage, and every day a performance. Followers enacted bizarre rituals, circles of fire, chanting at night, reenacting Manson's visions of apocalypse. They drilled the family name into themselves, shedding all remnants of their former identities. Letters from parents were burned. Names were changed. The past was a ghost to be exorcised, and the future was Manson's design. Yet fear was never explicit. It seeped quietly, like a shadow creeping across a floor. You could feel it in the hesitant movements, the whispered glances, the unspoken obedience. It was a horror born not of sudden violence, but of complete surrender. By mid-1969, Manson became obsessed with fame. The music scene had eluded him, yet he would not let it defeat him. He leveraged connections, slipping into the homes of musicians and producers. The family's encounters with Hollywood were a mix of allure and chaos. They were welcomed at first, allowed glimpses of the glittering city, yet their eccentricity quickly created tension. Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, a figure of the California music scene, briefly hosted Manson and his followers. The ranch hands and studio assistants marveled at the group's otherworldly presence, colorful clothes, strange rituals, endless talk of prophecy. Yet the glamour faded as disorder reigned. Manson's obsessions clashed with the structured world outside, and eventually, he was cast out. Rejection fueled his rage. It was subtle, like a coiled spring ready to snap. He spoke of betrayal, of a world blind to truth, and of destiny denied. To the family, these were not mere complaints. They were commandments. They absorbed his anger, letting it twist into purpose. Soon, the desert nights grew colder, darker, heavier. The family's gatherings became solemn, filled with whispered instructions and encoded warnings. They rehearsed behaviors, memorized plans, and sharpened obedience. Each member internalized the idea that they were chosen, and that the outside world was corrupt, dangerous, and inevitable. By the summer of 1969, the family's world had shifted completely. The desert, once a symbol of freedom, had become a crucible. Trust, fear, loyalty, and fanaticism blended into a single reality. Manson's influence extended beyond the ranch. It seeped into Los Angeles, into the culture, into the city itself. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. The family left the ranch for excursions into town, spreading their presence like shadows over the sunlit streets. To outsiders, they were wandering hippies, lost souls seeking adventure. But beneath the peace signs and bohemian clothes was a rhythm dictated by Manson's visions. And in that rhythm lay a darkness that few could recognize until it struck. The story of the family was no longer just about a man and his followers. It had become a living, breathing entity. It was a network of minds, hearts, and fears, all synchronized to a single will. It moved silently, invisibly, through the California landscape, waiting, watching, preparing. The outside world remained oblivious. Los Angeles laughed, danced, and ignored the undercurrents rising just beyond its borders. But the desert had its own pulse, and in its heat and shadows, the family rehearsed for the world they believed was coming. A world in flames, a world they alone could survive. The nights grew heavy. The desert wind carried an unnatural stillness as the family moved through Los Angeles under the cover of darkness. They were silent, deliberate, and precise. To outsiders, they were just shadows flitting past streetlights, unremarkable, almost invisible. But inside, the air was thick with tension, anticipation, and the unspoken weight of what Manson demanded. The songs that had once been melodies now echoed as warnings, the laughter of youth now masking devotion and fear. Manson's instructions were never shouted. They were whispers, gestures, coded phrases, subtle enough to be ignored by the untrained eye, yet absolute for those who followed. The family moved like a single organism, coordinated and unquestioning. Every glance communicated compliance. Every nod confirmed loyalty. It was during these nights that the family became fully Manson's extension. They were actors in a performance too sinister for any script, participants in a vision no one else could see. The world outside remained oblivious. The city pulsed with life, unaware that just beyond the glow of neon signs, a cult had rehearsed its purpose with terrifying devotion. The tension mounted not only in the streets, but within the family itself. Some members began to question, to falter. Doubt flickered like a candle threatened by wind, but Manson's presence was magnetic. His gaze could still command obedience, and his words still blurred reality and fantasy. Those who wavered often returned, drawn back by a mix of fear, desire for approval, and an unshakable belief in the visions he had painted. It was a psychological grip that few could comprehend, and fewer could resist. Even as law enforcement began noticing strange occurrences, the true scale of the family's influence remained hidden. Investigators were methodical, combing through L.A. neighborhoods for clues. They interviewed neighbors, questioned witnesses, and slowly began to piece together the puzzle. Each statement painted a picture of eeriness. Subscribe to our channel. Of young people devoted to a charismatic leader, of a house filled with strange rituals and an unsettling calm. The authorities sensed that what they were chasing was not just criminal behavior. It was ideology made flesh, a network of minds intertwined with obsession. Yet for months, the trail was elusive. The family's careful planning and Manson's manipulative foresight made them slippery. Ghosts moving through the city with intent yet invisible to the ordinary eye. The eventual arrests were dramatic, though not violent in the conventional sense. Law enforcement surrounded properties, coordinated entry, and apprehended members quietly at first, understanding that confrontation could destabilize a fragile, fanatical network. Inside the homes and ranches, agents found a world frozen in time. Remnants of music, written prophecies, coded messages, and objects used in ceremonies that were part worship, part obedience training. The psychological weight in those rooms was palpable. Even seasoned officers described it as unsettling, a chill that lingered long after they left. Courtroom proceedings became a theater of their own. Manson sat, calm and unnerving, a small man whose gaze could still draw attention and command the room. Family members alternated between tearful displays of remorse and unwavering adherence to his teachings. The media frenzy outside painted a picture of horror, fascination, and disbelief. Observers noted the cult-like dynamics, the complete control he had exerted, and the eerie charisma that had lured so many young people into devotion. Legal experts dissected the manipulation. Psychologists analyzed the blind obedience, and the public tried to comprehend how a man could exert such influence over human lives. Yet even as judgment was pronounced, the story did not end. The shadow of the family extended beyond the courtroom. Books, documentaries, and films revisited the events, each retelling emphasizing the psychological horror over the acts themselves. The lessons were grim. Charisma can be weaponized, innocence can be corrupted, and trust can be manipulated with frightening precision. The Manson family became more than a case study. It became a cautionary tale. It illustrated the fragility of human judgment, the power of influence, and the dark potential lurking beneath charm and music. Decades later, Spahn Ranch remains abandoned. Its wooden facades sag under the weight of history. Visitors speak of a strange energy, a lingering feeling of unease. Even in its decay, the ranch tells the story of a man who shaped fear and devotion into a singular vision, and a generation of followers who surrendered themselves completely. The echoes of those nights resonate in pop culture, in psychology, in law, and in the collective memory of a city that once danced freely, oblivious to the shadows moving just beyond the neon lights. Manson's influence, chilling and precise, reminds us that darkness is not always loud. Subscribe to my channel. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, it teaches, it charms, and it waits. And in those whispers, entire lives can be reshaped, Entire futures rewritten and entire worlds altered without a single overt scream. The story of the family is not just about what they did, but about how easily human devotion can be bent, twisted, and directed. It is a story of fear, of charisma, of surrender, and of a darkness that once ignited refuses to be ignored. Subscribe to our channel for more interesting true crime stories.